This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
The most recent quarterly statistical bulletin published by the Central Bank of Nigeria (CBN) shows that the federal government spent up to 74% of its retained revenue on debt servicing in the first quarter of 2024. This amount spent came up to 1.31 trillion naira, leaving only about 400 billion naira for other expenditures. Now, despite these stark figures, data shows that the federal government earned more revenue and spent less this year in the first quarter compared to the first quarter of 2023. For more analysis of this, I'm joined by Vincent Oshoma. Mr. Oshoma is an economist. Hello and welcome to the conversation, Mr. Oshoma.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Let's start off with just the significance of spending 74% of retained revenue on debt servicing in the first quarter. What are your initial thoughts?
I would say that it is alarming. It's something that calls for concern. But, because when you look at the amount spent and what is left for other projects, it's quite small. But some persons will draw your attention to the fact that there was a time it was far more than this. But we are looking at what has happened in terms of the government trying to correct the fiscal issues, and then we are not still seeing them going the same path that we are coming from. So that's cause for a lot of concern.
Very recently we saw the National Assembly approving the request to include 6.2 trillion naira to the 2024 budget. And we already have a deficit that's about half of the budget, where we're supposed to fund that with borrowing. Half of the initial budget, we're funding that with borrowing and whatnot. How do you see that impacting our performance over the next few quarters towards the end of the year?
Yeah, if you look at government projects, most times we'll continue to see the increase in deficit because it's funded by borrowing. Though there were steps at the beginning of the year, we saw a gradual correction where there was a reduction in deficit. But we have seen that the government is increasing its borrowing because we have not seen really a cut in expenditure in terms of the current expenditure. So we'll continue to see this, and that's why a lot of persons are concerned that if we continue in this direction, our debts will become unsustainable.
Well, one of the things that I don't know if I would call it a major positive, and maybe that's where you'll share your thoughts. If we compare the data with the first quarter of 2023, we've earned more, we generated more revenue, and our expenditure has not been as high as it was during that period. Doesn't that show some sign of positivity?
Yeah, when you look at it, because when you talk about we have generated more revenue, and that is coming on the back that the removal of subsidy and also some other steps the government take, it has led to increase in revenue. Then you can say there is some positivity in terms of the numbers. But one thing you also look at is the fact that when you look at the level of the money spent, a lot of these funds are going through recurrent expenditure, and that's why people are concerned. Because there is actually nothing wrong in borrowing. There's nothing wrong in having deficit budget, but it's to what the money is usually the focus that we are looking at. And when at the point that when we remove, when there was more subsidy, there was some level of correction. But now we are seeing government borrowing more increasing. That's we have not really seen investment coming as expected. So that's why analysts are concerned.
There was a point, this was, I believe, in 2022 or so, between 2020 and 2022, there were periods when we used up to 97% of revenue just handling debt servicing. So again, I'm coming back to whether some of these economic reforms that the administration has undertaken is actually giving us some sort of leeway. If we're comparing to where we were before, is there light at the end of the tunnel?
That's what I mentioned, because there were some steps taken to correct the situation. Because that's why I said when you look at it from where we're coming from, you see that things look better. Because we're spending, like you mentioned, about 90% of our revenue to service debt. But you can also agree to the fact that there have been increase in revenue, and that's because things like subsidy have been removed in terms from the bill and some other things that the government, there have been an increase in revenue that goes to the government. But as we are seeing increase in revenue, we're also seeing increase in expenditure and also expenses. That's why I say if we continue in this direction, we are gradually going back to where we are coming from. And one of the major goals of the current government is to correct those fiscal issues that we had in the past.
And just before I let you go, Mr. Shoma, the MPC, after their meeting yesterday, they decided to hike interest rates. We're now at 26.75%. How do you see this latest development impacting our revenue performance and, again, just our ability to continue with debt servicing?
Yes, that is part of the issue that the government has been having. Because when you look at the increase in rates, where compared from last year, when you talk about there have been an increase in rates, and that has also increased government the amount spent in servicing government. So the fact that they increased rates yesterday also means that we are going to continue to see increasing rate, and that's quite concerning. It's lots of concern because that has an impact in development in the country. Because when you continue to have high rates, it means that you crowd out the private sector, and it will be difficult for businesses to actually access loans for development. And that's some of the issues that we will have to grapple with going forward.
Mr. Shoma, I appreciate your analysis on the conversation this morning. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest, Vincent Oshoma, is an economist joining me, where we've discussed the amount. 74% of retained revenue in the first quarter of this year was spent on debt servicing. That amount comes to 1.3 trillion naira. This has implications on our budgetary performance across the board and how much the government has to spend on projects this year.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.